Okay, so we've done Jewish history from the actually history itself, from the creation story all the way to the time of Jesus and what the world was like in the Roman Empire. The Jews were a very stubborn bunch, in the sense that they freedom was part of the way they viewed themselves. Uh, the fundamental message of freedom was pounded away in almost every page of the prayer book and every holiday. You'd always see the words Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. This is a remembrance of the going out of Egypt, again and again, because going out of Egypt had a fundamental message that a human being has worth and dignity and value, and it needs to be free, have a certain sense of freedom. And that message of freedom, that whole mindset, would not leave the Jews, no matter who oppressed them and who was in charge. And there were a series of revolts against the Romans, futile revolts. Bar Kokhba, Rabbi Akiva thought he was the Messiah. Kokhba means the star, the son of the stars. He really thought he was the Messiah. And maybe he was. Because we really believe that in every generation there's somebody worthy to be the Messiah. Maybe he was that person for that generation. But it didn't happen. They led a revolt against the Romans in the first century, and it was cruelly, viciously put down. I mean, it was early second century. Uh, you had sects like the Essenes who tried to distance themselves from the world, and close themselves off and live their own life in the desert. The Essenes lived near the Dead Sea, in Qumran, which you visited this summer, and you could see it. The whole town, they've resurrected it archaeologically. It's just fascinating to see on the shores of the Dead Sea. Not that anything grows on the Dead Sea, but they were able to have their own little freedom because they just stayed away from everybody, and they were apolitical. Uh, but the leaders of Masada were not. Okay. People came to Masada. They came. Masada is a big. It's almost like a mountain, like a stone mountain type of thing. Just overlooking the Dead Sea. Only Masada comes up like this. Just almost like this. So if you control the top of it, it's almost impossible to get to it, to attack it. The only way up the mountain was a snake path going back and forth like this of a very steep incline. And if whoever's ever on top of just throw rocks at you or hot oil or something, there's no way you could attack it. It was built. Masada was built as a fortress in this little city by King Herod, because Herod was very paranoid. He thought everybody hated him, and to some extent he was right. The story was that Herod, his Jewish origins were suspect. The Romans had appointed him as king. He tried to endear himself to Jewish people, and he wanted his massive building project. And he rebuilt the temple in a renovation that was unheard of before. The temple was magnificent. It was in the days of Solomon, and Herod it was even more magnificent. But he was afraid, so he would build these places to run to, all over. There's this place Herodian in the Judean hills. It's Judean hills, a bunch of hills, just like this. One of these hills, you just can't tell which one unless you get there. Inside the top of the hill is cut out like this. A whole city. It's called Herodian after King Herod, and in there, you really be protected if you ran away because no one will know where you are.
When was he king?
Around the time of Jesus, at that time. So this Masada fortress was there with a great deal of water silos and grain, and you could stay up, and weapons, and we discovered mikvahs there. And you could see that when you go there. The Jews had to live there. That's the way Jews lived, and they had a synagogue on. There's a synagogue on Masada now, and And the story about Masada, I don't know how many even know detail the story, but to make it short, the story is that they raised the Jewish flag, and it's infuriated the Romans. I don't know why the Romans just didn't leave them alone, let them stew in the middle of the desert there, and nobody would have known anything. Said they sent legion after legion, almost about 10 legions, I think, to go destroy Masada. And you could see we found the remains of some of these legions on the base of the mountain, and they boxed them out in big squares, so you could see from the top when you look down where they were. And but how could they take this mountain? Because it was almost impossible. And a bunch of people got up to Masada, the zealots, and they raised the Jewish flag, and they found only one way to defeat them, because they would send up their troops there, and they would just be slaughtered on the way up. Okay, come in. They got a hold of Jewish slaves. The Romans would love to take Jewish slaves. They got a whole bunch of Jewish slaves, maybe several thousand, and had to build a ramp of rocks and stone and sand up this steep cliff of the mountain. And the Jews knew that on top knew they were doomed. They could have stayed there for years and years and years. It took several years, I think, for them to accomplish all this. But the Jews on top could have stayed there for forever in real terms, because they had all this grain and water. But they would not fight the Jews that were building this ramp, and they would not kill them or throw anything at them or hurt them. So they knew that the end was coming. And then when the end was finally very, very near, as the story goes, the Romans got up the top of the hill, and they found that they all killed themselves. Now, suicide is forbidden in Judaism, so it's a very difficult subject to deal with. The thought is that they knew that the Romans would make example of them and parade them around throughout the Roman Empire, and in such a way as to defame God and Israel and Judaism. So instead, what they did was they didn't allow that to happen, so they killed themselves. And every year, many new inductees into the Israeli army are taken up there, and that's where they swear their oath into the army. And you find that when he visits to Israel, will have a bar bat mitzvah in that synagogue on top of Masada as well. It's a very, very popular thing to do.
How many years did this Battle of Masada
I don't know
last?
exactly. I don't know if it indicates it in the book here, but probably you're looking at least 5 years, maybe 10. I mean, it was a long time.
So they had a real long time to establish themselves up on the...
Yeah, and the
on
Romans why they made all this trouble for this little group is just beyond me. But it just goes to show the Jewish nature of just wanting to be free. Now, the Romans hated the Jews. After the Bar Kokhba rebellion, I don't remember the date. Maybe the last rebellion was in 134. I think that's probably correct. Something around there. Was it 135? Because the Romans had leveled the city after that revolt, and of Jerusalem, and about the year 135, they renamed Jerusalem to become Alina Capitolina. Alina Capitolina. That was the area capital, and it was a complete pagan city, nothing Jewish about it. And they renamed the land of Judea Philistinia, after the ancient hated enemies of the Jews, the Philistines, who no longer existed. The story in itself, who were the Philistines in ancient times, but that's another historical thing. But anyway, they did it just to stick it to the Jews, because Philistinia became Palestinia. There's no such thing as a Palestinian. There are no Philistines anymore. Understand how this name came about? So forever, and then the land became known all over as Palestine because was the Roman the Roman title that they gave to it after they threw the Jews out of Jerusalem. But the Romans made it more difficult and more difficult for the Jews to remain in Judea or Palestinian. Where were the Jews living at this time in the first, second century? The Jews essentially were living all over the known world, but with great strength in numbers, they were in, of course, the Palestinian area, and they were also in Babylonia, because they were taken to Babylonia what year was the first temple destroyed? 7. No. If you remember two dates in Jewish history, remember these two dates. 586 BCE. And the second temple was destroyed in the year 70. So 586 to now, you're talking about good 600 years, 700 years. I mean, Jews were really strong in Babylon all this time. And they were left alone. They didn't have much in the way of persecution. And they developed great academies of learning. And you would see discussions in the Talmud about great sages going back between the academies of learning in Babylon and the academies of learning in Israel. One of the stories in Israel concerns Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was given a free wish by the Roman general conquering the area after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and it would all seem like it was lost. Was it before the destruction of the temple? I don't remember. Anyway, he was given a free wish because he had come to him in a dream and told him he would be successful, and he recognized him. And he said, okay, I'm going to give you one wish. So he asked for the establishment, it was before the destruction of the temple. He asked for the establishment of a yeshiva in Yavne. What's Yavne? Yavne is a community near Tiberias, near the Sea of Galilee in the north. Some of the rabbis of the Talmud scolded him. Maybe he should have asked that they shouldn't destroy the temple. But obviously he felt that wish would not be granted. So why did he ask for that, of all the things he could have asked for? Because if Jewish learning will continue, then Judaism will continue. So he established this. But you could see the yeshivas schools of learning that were established in Israel were always subject to these persecutions and difficult times. Well, in Babylon, they just went on in free reign. Great academies of Surah, Pumbedita. They went on for 1,000 years. Now, I don't know if I talked to you about the development of Jewish law, but there's I'm going to make you a chart to refresh your memory if I have not done that, even if I hadn't. Of course, we have the written law and the oral law, right?
Yes.
That was the Torah was the first manifestation of Jewish law, and the Torah was given. About when was the Torah given? Mount Sinai. Well, we believe there were two Torahs, right? The written Torah and the oral.
Mishnah.
About the year 1250, I would say, BCE. Somewhere around there, 1300. Something like that. Give you a little time frame. Give you an idea how where this fits in the Jewish scale. Abraham was about 1800 BCE, before that. So the next big change in Jewish law occurs, I would say, with the I'll do it this way. The Mishnah. What was the Mishnah? They were so afraid that the oral law would be forgotten because it couldn't be taught. And you have all these stories about rabbis going into caves and teaching teaching, such to make sure, because they were forbidden, the Romans forbade them to study Torah. If you're caught teaching Torah, you would be burned to death or whatever. And what the Romans didn't invent it, the Greeks did it with the Maccabees, and it was a common thing that the people of the world knew that the strength of the Jew would lie in Torah. It's very interesting how the people of the world knew that, but so many Jews didn't know that. So many Jews didn't seek strength in Torah. Anyway, so afraid it would be lost, and there were different codifications of writing down the oral law as much as they could. And this final codification that was accepted, it was a sin to write it down, but they did it so it wouldn't be lost. Come in. It was written down about the year 200 by Rabbi Judah Hanasi, the Judah the Prince, who was the head of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court. In effect, the Jewish leader under the Romans. And the oral law deals with all kinds of things. I'll give you, for instance, the classic example that I like to give. The Torah says you should not cook a kid in the milk of its mother. 3 times. So we know it's a principle of logic that we have, that the Torah doesn't waste words. So if the Torah mentions something more than once, there's a reason. So the rabbis of the oral law teach us 3 things from this. We don't cook meat and milk. We don't eat meat and milk that's cooked together, and we don't derive any benefit from the cooking of meat and milk, which means you don't sell cheeseburgers at McDonald's. You know. So,
Eat 'em.
well, that's the second one, right? So those are the 3 things. Another classic example: an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. The Bible says. So the oral law says it's not literal. It means money. Monetary compensation. If you knock out my eye by mistake, you have to pay me, because the court will determine for the loss of an eye, the loss of work, the loss of the loss of pay, the loss of seeing, sight, maybe pain, whatever the courts will determine. The oral law is a way of applying the written law, and many of the principles of the oral law were given at Sinai. Actually, all the principles were given at Sinai. The development of how you apply those principles was something that went on and on and on and on. And this is a codification called the Mishnah in the year 200. Now, something called the Gemara. Some say it goes as well to 900. Gemara was the oral law that grew up around the Mishnah. I'll go get a copy of this and show it to you how it looks. Very fascinating. There's some in the back there.
What do those words mean in Hebrew?
Mishnah means teaching. Gemara also means learning. That's the learning. The Mishnah is written in Hebrew. The Gemara is written in Aramaic.
Really?
Right.
Why is that?
Because Aramaic was the language of the common people at the time.
Yeah.
And it's strange. Aramaic became the language of the common people. Then it was the language of the elite scholars. Then it was the language of the common. It was back and forth. But Aramaic was spoken not only among Jews. It was spoken also in the general world. You have to understand the Semitic world. Almost all the languages are the same. If you know Hebrew, you could take any of these ancient Semitic languages, and if you learn how to read the letters, you could read it and understand it. And the dialect may be a little different. Some of the rules of grammar are a little different, but you can read it. Even Aramaic and Hebrew it's the same. Really, you have to learn certain rules. Certain letters are interchangeable, like the taf and the shin are interchangeable. Things like that. So there became a whole oral law around the Mishnah that was written down because of persecution around this time, between 500 and 800.
Was the Mishnah meant for the common man, or was it meant for just the sages and
Jewish learning was meant for the common. All Jewish learning was meant for the common man.
But I mean, was it written for the common?
written so-
Or just
yeah, we
to
should-
maintain a record?
Come in. It wasn't published.
Well, I know that
It
it
wasn't
has
pub-
Xerox machines, you know.
It wasn't published, by Sanchino or something, because they didn't have publishing houses. To have a book, you had to have someone sit down and write it for you. But it was studied by everybody, I would think. Everybody who could study. Anybody was welcome to it. Just give you a little historical perspective. Oh, no. There were a series of stages that came up. Geonim, Rishonim, and Achronim. I'll get a piece of Talmud in the back, and I'll show you what I'm talking about.
While you're getting that, can you address this question that the latter of these writings, are we still in Palestine or have we moved over to Spain?
Okay, I'll explain it.
Okay.
Or
Or when did we move over to Spain? When did the writings shift into the higher places like in Toledo?
I'm about to get to that's why I put this up in the first place.
All right.
We already talked about what is Palestine and how the name came about. The Mishnah was Rabbi Judah Hanassi, the renowned authority, and he was in Palestine, around the year 200. Gemara, arose a Gemara on this Mishnah in two places. Gemara means the teaching of the schools, and one was in Palestine, and one especially Yavne, and the other was in Babylonia, where Jews had been there for since the year 586 BCE.
One was in Babylon, the other in Jerusalem?
Not in Jerusalem. They were thrown out of Jerusalem by the Romans. They were in Yavne, which is near the Sea of Galilee. Yavne. Yavneh, I guess. Okay. Interesting thing is, we decide questions of Jewish law today by opening up a piece of Talmud and seeing what the Talmud said about it. We have a new problem, and no one discussed it. We'll see what the Talmud say about it. Which Talmud is more authoritative, the Babylonian Talmud or the Palestinian Talmud? Well, you think the Palestinian Talmud because it was in Israel. Actually, the Babylonian Talmud was much more authoritative. Why? Because they weren't subject to all these persecutions that the Jews had to endure in Israel. So the Babylonian academies flourished in a greater way, and there was much more learning going on there, and much more that was remembered. And so much of the Palestinian Talmud that we have is only fragments, and so much of it was lost. Let me just open up a book. It's a very interesting old book. This example of what these things look like. They make them brand new today also. This is the Vilna Shas. This is from Vilna. This particular edition probably goes back to about 16th century, and all editions of Talmud that are printed today are a photocopy of this, except with some rare scholarly changes. Let's see, when was this printed? Tough. Long time ago. 1928.
Wow.
Okay. This is what a page of Talmud looks like. I'm going to give you a view of it. It opens up like this. This is the first page. The first page is always page 2. Bet. First word of each tractate is always made larger. And this is the Mishnah. It brings the Mishnah from here to here. Here Gimel Mem here means Gemara. It brings the Mishnah from here to here. So you have 3 lines of Mishnah. Right? Now you'll have a discussion. Now this Mishnah is Hakol Shochtim. Everybody is allowed to be a shochet, to slaughter animals, to make it kosher. The shkitatam kshera, and their shkita will be kosher. Chutz mechereshota v'kata, except for a cheresh, someone who is cheresh is a case someone will be deaf and dumb, so there was no way that he would be able to get proper instruction at that time. Shota is someone who's intellectually inferior, simpleton, probably with a very very low IQ.
Yes.
And a katan is a child. Okay, and it goes through. And it goes through 3 lines of discussing this, and then they have the Talmud on this particular ruling, right? Describing it, and the Talmud go from here to here to here till you get to the next Mishnah. See, the next Mishnah will be how many pages later?
So Mishnah is a commentary, the Talmud.
No. Mishnah is the Mishnah, and the commentary is a commentary on the Mishnah.
Okay.
Wait, and so the Talmud is both?
I never knew
Well, you have here. I still didn't get to the next Mishnah yet. You have
that. So the Talmud is just a commentary?
no the commentary on the Mishnah.
Right.
In other words, the new rulings of new circumstances that they was faced with in life.
Does that mean the Talmud is the Gemara?
Well, I'll tell you. It's good. All right, I'll try to let the Gemara.
It's the Gemara.
Excuse me. The Gemara is. We use the words Talmud and Gemara interchangeably. The Talmud actually means the Mishnah and the Gemara put together. Okay.
And that's what that is.
Right.
It's the Talmud.
Yeah.
There's 5 books in the Bible, the Torah.
Oh, I knew that.
That would go from
This
there.
is different though.
Yeah.
Okay. Does that do it for you?
Yeah.
And what that book is?
This is the Talmud. It's one of the books of the Talmud, right? The one about shchita, about kosher slaughter. The next Mishnah comes about after 13 folios. You know, this being a folio,
Okay.
both sides. So it's about 26 pages on the 3 lines. Right? Now you have the next Mishnah. From here to here, 2 lines. Right?
And what is
Then we'll go on discussion on the next Mishnah for quite some time.
what is the Mishnah?
Okay. Came a little late, but I'll try to go back. Mishnah was the first writing down of the oral law because they were afraid it would be forgotten. My purpose in bringing this to you now was to give you an understanding of what happened to the Jews in Israel and how the Jews in the diaspora already in Babylon were considered more authoritative as far as their learning is concerned, as far as directing where Jewish life is going to go, because they weren't subject to as much persecution. Just while I'm here, I'll just show you the rest of what's going on here. Now, there's after the Gemara, there's a group called the Sabol Ra'im. I didn't put it in them. They were working on the editing of the Gemara, putting it together. They had all these oral statements of rabbis from the year 200 and on that were important, and putting it together in readable form and changing it, moving around. That's why I have 500 to 800. The Gemara was written down in the year 500, but it didn't get to its final form to 800, 850, something like that. And Saboraim were doing that during this period. Then the Gaonim, like Sadia Gaon and Hai Gaon, others, they were great scholars. They wrote their own books about Jewish law and their approach to it. But the real great scholars of the Talmud dissecting it were the Rishonim, about the 1100 to 500, 550, 1500, 1550, something like that. Here's some of the Rishonim, the basic ones. The most famous of the Rishonim is Rashi. Everybody's heard of Rashi. Rashi wrote commentary on the entire Torah, the definitive commentary. Not that everything he wrote is his. Generally, Rashi brings the simple understanding of what he thought was the meaning of the text according to the traditions that he had. And he did the same thing with the Talmud. Rashi, when you open up page of Talmud, is on the inside notes. This is probably the form it would take when people wrote lectures, inside notes. And then there's a group called the Tosafot, or Tosfot. Tosfot are the means additional. These are like, Rashi's sons-in-laws, grandsons, and other great scholars of that particular time. Talk about 12th century, 13th century, and they're on the outside. And often they challenge each other's understanding of text.
That's incredible.
Right? Then you have commentaries on those commentaries here. Right? Then you go to the back. Then you got the guys in the back. Right? Commentaries on the commentaries on the commentaries, and how you piece it together. Right? These are all Rishonim. And then there are books written by Rishonim, whole sets of volumes on all this that are not put in the back of pages of Talmud. And then today what we have the Achronim. Rishonim means the first ones. And the Achronim means the latter ones. Well, we live in the age of the latter ones. And the latter commentaries. That's why I didn't put 1500s to where. We're still in it. And you'll find volumes and volumes and volumes being written today on pages of Talmud. I understand it.
Is it always laid out like that, where, the latter ones are in the back?
No, latter ones aren't in the back. Those are still Rishonim in the back. Other Rishonim.
Okay. Is Rambam one of those?
Rambam, Maimonides, he was a Rishon, but he wrote his own books. They didn't include him in the Talmud. He wrote his own codification, trying to piece it all together. Because what happens here, these are written in. The Mishnah has 6 sections. A section dealing with what you call civil law, damages and stuff like that. Some ritualistic laws, the temple, laws of women. There's 6 categories, and the Talmud is written in a way that they use principles of logic, which are delineated. However, if you're having a discussion on laws of the Sabbath, and you're having a discussion on logic, well, they'll bring in a ruling of the use of this particular point of logic that Rabbi so-and-so said about Jewish divorce. And if you want to find this ruling about Jewish divorce, you better know what page on the Talmud of the Sabbath you have to look to find this ruling on Jewish divorce. And while they brought his ruling on Jewish divorce, they'll bring his ruling on if he's not a kind of scholar which will appear in many other places, they'll bring everything that he said. They thought it was important, along with it, even the matter has to do with nothing of the subject matter. So in order for you to find these rulings, you have to have literally a photographic memory. Or a computer. Let me finish. So, in fact, today, Bar Ilan University had done a project which was partially funded by the Pentagon because it had implications in its programming that could be used by them. But they took all the codifications of Jewish law, Torah, the Mishnah, Gemara, Geonim, Rishonim, and Achronim, that they could find, and you can get it on a CD-ROM. They discounted it just now for $700. That's incredible. You type in 1 or 2 words, keywords, they'll give you all the sources where stuff on that appears. I mean,
In Hebrew or?
in Hebrew, of course.
Of course.
So does this book look the same everywhere?
Right.
Who decides? Like now you said there's all these commentaries still being, you know, that they're
Well,
all, who decided that Rashi's would be,
Rashi and the Tosfot are considered the classic commentaries on the Talmud. So they're always put on a folio, no matter where you open. Rashi on the inside, Tosfot on the outside. All the discussions revolve around their approach, because they didn't bring their own words so much as they brought the traditions that they had. So those traditions were maintained through this. The problem becomes now through scholarship. A lot of what appears here was censored in the Middle Ages by the church.
Why?
Because it was may have seemed critical to Christianity, or the church didn't particularly like some of his teachings. It may have gone against it. So the church, there were times in the Middle Ages where the church would hold burnings of Talmuds. And then they made the Jews, if they want to study Talmud, they made them take out certain sections. So this particular piece of Talmud has all the has all these has all the censorship built in. Now we're discovering those pieces of Talmud again somewhere. A lot of our great treasures of learning are in the basement in the Vatican that we have no access to. But what we are doing, Steinsaltz, for instance, is famous for doing that. So now you can create, and you figure there may be 2 or 3 pages between this page and that page that's now out, right? Well, do you create a new edition? Well, everybody knows the numbering system of this edition. Of course, for 300 years, or more, that's what everybody's been using. So, so the new editions might include the critical scholarly editions might include, like Steinsaltz, some of the censorship portions, but they won't continue the numbering until they get to the place where everybody else numbers. I don't know if you follow me there. Yeah, and you know they'll wait 2 or 3 pages before they continue the new numbers.
where did y'all get that particular edition?
This?
That it looks like that?
Oh, this is probably Rabbi Geffen's, may he rest in peace. But I'll show you his plenty more right here. And these are other editions. Same. Here are other editions. Here they're edition for students.
Oh my God.
But you open it up, front page, they all look the same. You see?
Yeah, when you get mitzvah, you get
Hey, you want, take a look at it, I'll put it for you out here.
People in law school today should be.
You never realized.
Right. Did it have it in English?
The Talmud is written in English, but you want to have this kind of writing up in English. Sanchino has it in English. Now the Talmud is really the Jewish heart and soul built in. It's a dialogue. And the Talmudic method, I've heard it described as the mind of God. You'll have debates between scholars that are very heated, very animated. Yes?
Because on each page you said the highlighted print was the name of that particular Mishnah. Is that what you said?
Well,
Like,
the
for example, right here.
yeah, that's in the beginning. That's the name of that chapter. That's the first word in the chapter, so they name it after the first word. That's all.
You said
It's upside down.
Oh. Thought that looked strange.
You did too much wine last night.
I can't even use the excuse I don't have my glasses on.
3 little lines.
You want to study Talmud? Like, I'll never finish Jewish history.
This thing here at the top, it says something like
Perek Rishon, first chapter.
So it's not related to Rishonim, it just means.
Right.
So the next one should say.
Perek Sheni.
Did you say these were the Totsu?
Or is no?
The outside of the Tosafot, this. These are the commentaries on them. There's some commentaries on them.
The extended family.
Yeah.
Everybody has to have the last word.
No, there is no last word.
There
Yes.
is no last word,
They
period.
all have the vowels.
No. I don't think so.
That's where
So you
this
need
is.
advanced Hebrew there.
Right.
And Aramaic.
This
Yes.
is Aramaic, and written in Aramaic too?
The Talmud's in Aramaic, yes. Commentaries are in Hebrew.
You know, about this question, like.
Wait, there's a question first.
I have a set of books that are, it's called a linear translation of Torah, and it's got like a line of Hebrew, a line of English,
Right.
line by line, and then it's got Rashi's commentaries with
Right.
it too.
Right.
So I mean, that's a good place to start if you wanted something.
But that's Torah, it's not Talmud.
No, but it's got Rashi.
It's the Rashi on Torah,
Okay.
not the Rashi on Talmud.
Okay, I got it.
Okay? Okay, what was your question?
Okay, I just want to be clear in my mind. The Torah is the written that was given on Mount Sinai.
Right.
The Talmud is the commentary on the Torah, the oral Torah coming to us from Babylon,
No, it comes from Sinai.
from Sinai. Now,
Through Babylon, through Palestine, through wherever. And then we're constantly adding to the oral Torah, using the principles that they gave us at Sinai, in the oral Torah, how to apply the written Torah.
okay, now, the Talmud, which is the oral Torah, is broken into two basic sections, Mishnah and Gemara.
Right.
Now, the Gaonim, the Rishonim, and Acharonim, these are the commentators on the Talmud in the latter times.
Right. You got it.
That's why I was little.
You got it.
I gotta have a skeleton in place first.
Now wait a second. There's such a thing as Torah law, and there's such a thing as rabbinic law. Torah law can be either written or oral.
Okay, wait a minute.
If it's written, it's clear. If it's derived from the written, it carries just as much weight as if it was written, by use of logic.
Okay. then-
But there's such a thing as rabbinic law, which is not written and not derived, but the rabbis felt necessary for either to build a fence around Torah so you wouldn't violate it, or to for the protection of the Jewish community. And rabbinic law is possible even in today's world. The rabbis come out with an edict. For instance, Rabbeinu Gershom, about 10th century, came out with an edict banning polygamy. According to the Torah, man's allowed to have more than one wife. We know that throughout the Talmud, you'd be very hard pressed to find one of the thousands and thousands and thousands of Talmudic families mentioned that one rabbi had more than one wife. Because monogamy was the rule. Even in the Bible, monogamy was the rule. When you have polygamy, for instance, Abraham didn't want to have two wives. Sarah forced him to take Hagar as a wife. Jacob didn't want to have two wives. He thought he married Rachel, which was Leah. And monogamy was generally the rule. But Rabbeinu Gershom came out with an edict in the 10th century for monogamy in the Jewish world. However, Rabbeinu Gershom's edict did not apply to those communities that he didn't have authority over. So it did not apply to many of the Sephardic communities, especially in Yemen. And when Jews came from Yemen to Israel in the 50s, many of them came with 2 or 3 wives. Because the Yemenites today don't marry more than one wife if in Israel. The couple of thousand were left back in Yemen, I don't know, maybe. But that was an example of a rabbinic edict, a law that we need to follow because it's a rabbinic law.
What was the rabbi's name again?
Gershom. Now, there's another example. I'll give you another example. the edict of eating meat and milk together is a Torah law. You should not cook a baby goat in the milk of its mother. But what about chicken and milk? Chicken doesn't have any milk, right?
Mhm.
A chicken doesn't have milk. So according to the Torah, the Talmud explains, you're allowed to eat milk and chicken together, cook it together. You're allowed to have chicken cacciatore with cheese on it or whatever, Parmesan. But the rabbis ruled that since chicken is so much like meat, it would be too confusing, and so they made an edict to treat chicken like meat. Well, how does this affect us in a practical way? I'll tell you how it affects me.
Only a few places to eat out.
I wait 6 hours after eating meat before I eat dairy. However, under certain circumstances, since it is established custom among many Jews to wait 3 hours, especially German Jews, I think the Jews from Holland used to wait 1 hour. So if after eating chicken, after 3 hours, under certain circumstances, if I would be able to brush my teeth or wash out my mouth, I might eat dairy. Because it's a rabbinic eating. And the waiting itself is a rabbinic. So you have a rabbinic law, see? It's already a lot. So you have to understand there is a distinction. You can break a rabbinic law under certain circumstances, but you can never break a Torah law.
So the Torah law is only meat.
It's only beef and
Veal.
veal and lamb, that sort of thing.
Would it be any animal that would give
Milk.
its young suck
Right.
or milk?
That was also kosher.
That was
Right.
okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
The question I had, Rabbi, was when we were talking about Talmud, Mishnah, and what have you. Is this where we get what is considered to be majority opinions and dissenting
All right.
opinions?
Oh, glad you
with the various different
brought that up. I was
commentaries?
going to raise it before, but I got the sidetrack. There was a time, I think, where the law was clear. That for almost everything, everybody knew what to do. Then came persecution. And you know, if you have a chain and you take away one link in the middle of the chain, everything collapses. And oral law was like that. And under persecution, especially the times of the Romans and the Greeks, there were points of oral law that were lost. That's why it was decided to write it down, because they felt they were going to lose it all. They feared they would lose it all. And then they became debates. You know, I'll give you a famous debate, and it discusses a rabbinic edict, so to speak. Had to be. The whole story of Hanukkah happened after the Bible was canonized, which is about 200 BCE, by the rabbis at the time, the Sanhedrin, and all the books of the Bible they put in there. The book of Maccabees was too late. Happened afterwards. But to celebrate the story of Hanukkah, you know, we light Hanukkah candles, and that became just a discussion of Jewish law. There isn't much in the Talmud about Hanukkah because the descendants of the Maccabees were not people who behaved themselves in the best way, and so the rabbis didn't like them very much, so they didn't put too much in. But there became one of the points of discussion was, how do you light the Hanukkah menorah? Do you light one candle the first night and 8 candles the last night? Do you light 8 candles the first night and 1 candle the last night? Because if you think about it, they had all this oil. It may have lasted for 8 days, but every day you got a little less.
Yeah.
So maybe you should light 8 candles, right? And then the last night you light, there's only a little left, you light 1 candle, right? There's a logic to it, right? They couldn't figure out, they couldn't remember, because they weren't allowed to practice this. Couldn't remember what they had done. Oh, so Shammai said, I remember that this is the way, that the Rabbi so-and-so said, this is the way you do it. You light ate the first night and one the last night. The Rabbi at Hillel said, no, 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 no. Eli won the first night and ate the last night. Malim Bekodesh, she was sent in holiness. So they voted. They sat down and they voted. In the Sanhedrin, they voted. Jewish law is not like the Simpson trial. The majority wins. It's a general principle in Torah. Achavei Rabim Lahatos, you go after the majority. So you don't have a jury of 10, 12. You always have to have a panel of with an odd number. And they were always, they could be ordinary people, but you needed to have at least one scholar among them who could explain what the law was. And generally, in important cases, especially capital cases like the Simpson case, you'd have 71 rabbis, and they would be deciding the case. Shaking your head, no?
No, I'm just wondering.
Really doesn't.
But they would take a vote. You know, it wouldn't be that if one person said, "Well, I'm not sure," then it would be a hung jury. They would take a vote.
I doubt if Johnny Cochran could do too well with 70 rabbis.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So, you know, Hillel was in the majority, so Hillel won all the time. Until one day Hillel got sick, and all those people went to visit him, and so they convened the Jewish, the Shammai convened the court, and so Shammai passed a whole group of edicts. I'm thinking case because they had a majority that day. But then they voted, and they voted one candle the first night and 8 candles the last. And they gave a principle that we ascend in holiness. We'll go more and more and more. Because the miracle became greater every day. Well, the moil might have been diminished, but the miracle became greater every day. And so that's an example of rabbinic law that affects us today. That's part of our soul and our being. We don't change that. So, rabbinic law and Torah law come together in all of these formations.
Could those laws be changed? I mean, like, let's say all of a sudden the rabbis decided, well, we can eat chicken again. I mean, could they decide that?
Yes and no. Theoretically, it's possible. And technically, it might be, if they could convene ostensibly a Sanhedrin, modern day Sanhedrin, of the power and force that they had in ancient times, it's possible that they might be able to do it. However, we have an established principle in the law, minhag kadinhu, that a custom is like a law. And once you have an established custom, it's very hard to break. Wearing a yarmulke on your head, covering your head for a man, is a custom, not a law.
I didn't realize that.
Right, but it's very hard to break that. Sephardim generally don't cover their head. Many Sephardim don't cover the head all the time. And then when they come to synagogue, they'll say a prayer. Yes?
How long did the Sanhedrin manage to stay together? Was it up until the destruction of the Second Temple?
The Sanhedrin really began after the destruction of the First Temple. So I would say you're looking probably late 6th century BCE, and it probably maintained its existence into much of the Gemara time. Probably through much of the Gemara period. He'll talk about it in here. I just don't remember the dates. All right.
Did they convene in Babylon?
Did they what?
Convene in Babylonia?
The Sanhedrin? It was started in Babylon. So they could convene a court of that size and nature. That's a very good question. But I don't think so. I don't think the institution that you're referring to, I don't think existed anymore in Babylon at that time.
The Sanhedrin?
Yeah.
I was going to say, weren't we under the Babylonian captivity?
That's 586 BCE. But when you get to there were Jews who stayed in Babylon for 1,000 years. But once the return came to Israel, and you had the period of the Maccabees and the Romans, the center authority was there in Israel.
As I understood it, the order of the Sanhedrin came from the elders under Moses, 70, and including Moses.
Moses? No. Moses was 1300 BCE, way before. The Moses, that may be the model.
Yeah, 70
The model, but
70
it
elders.
was Ezra
Okay.
in the time of this, after the destruction of the.
That's the model.
Right. Okay. What's happening in the world at this particular time through all of this? Many upheavals. And the Jews are going everywhere. The Jews have to get out of what is Palestine. It's becoming uncomfortable for them in Babylon too. No one seems to want them. And Christianity is getting stronger, and the Jews are really persona non grata because they're very fearful of the Jews, because if Jesus was to create the new Israel, why is the old Israel still around? You know, and they killed Jesus, and they should suffer, and all these things that arose. I'll give you just a very brief map. It's really not good, but I'm not a good map drawer, but I'll try as best I can. This is Israel, and this is the Mediterranean. You had Jews fleeing and moving away. Many came south to seek refuge in the Arabian Peninsula, Arabia. Many went up here, Syria, Babylon, Iraq, what's today Iran, Persia. You know the whole story of the Persian Jews, and that's the story of the Jews in Persia, of course. And many went this way, along northern Africa. And then they eventually wound up in Spain, many in Spain as well. And many went this way into Europe, Turkey, Greece, Italy, and came to France and England. I'll give you a practical change the rabbis made in Jewish law because of this. Jewish marriage was done in the following way. First, there was a Kiddushin, which means sanctification, the ring ceremony. The rabbis felt it was insulting for a Jewish woman to get married and not receive a gift, so a husband would give a gift to his bride, a ring, let's say, and he would say, with this ring I thee wed according to the laws of Moses in Israel. If she accepted the ring in front of two witnesses, they were married. She threw it in his face, they weren't. Right? Took it off and didn't want, no, they're not married. But she accepts it, they're married. However, they couldn't live together yet. They were married for all intents and purposes, that even if they wanted to marry someone else, they had to get a divorce. They couldn't live together yet. They couldn't live conjugally for a year. A year later, they had a ceremony called Nisuin, which was the chuppah ceremony. The chuppah represents the domain of the groom. Takes the bride to his house, and she walks around it 7 times, putting a protective shield around. You know, that's why the bride goes around the groom. Right? Some people say it's because the woman runs circles around the man.
How does that fit in with the Orthodox rabbis?
What?
How does any of this fit in with the Orthodox rabbis?
Why?
The Jewish ceremony.
That's traditional. That's tradition. Anyway, however they did it then, it was a year apart. They really had to get to know each other for a year, and not in a sexual way.
Did they live together?
No.
No.
After that,
Your mother's
so
still
what
happy.
happened was, in this situation, on these persecutions, you didn't know where you're going to be tomorrow, let alone next year. So what did they do? They combined the ceremonies in one. So that we do all together, both ceremonies together as part of one ceremony today. So it's a practical application of how the rabbis would change things.
So
Well, then you
actually,
get
the
a
first was sort of like an engagement
Yeah.
then.
No, that was something else. An engagement was something else.
Can I just get a backtrack?
Engagement, you just say.
What?
long.
This is
The
a
lines
long
that are going
courtship.
down to the right, is that Babylonians there?
Babylonians up here.
Okay, Africa.
Up here is Syria and Iran. Over here is Arabia.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Arabia, Yemen, Saudi
What
Arabia.
about
Where to?
China? What about China? Do we think China?
China. It's possible China's back there.
Yeah, not there.
Maybe some Jews made it there.
Takes a little longer.
That's true.
We know there was a Jewish community in China. That the colonial times there was correspondence between the colonial American Jewish community, which was only about 3,500, and the Chinese Jews asking for assistance. It's amazing, but since all that's happened in China in the century, they've basically been lost. Well, the question will be: is did they come from this, or did they come from the 10 tribes from where the Assyrians dispersed the 10 tribes much earlier? We don't know. We don't know. And there's the Jews in India, and all kinds of very, very, very isolated lands in that spot. Also have the same situation as with the Jews of Ethiopia. Similar thing. It's generally thought the Ethiopian Jews came from the tribe of Dan, that came during the Assyrian dispersion, but there's been some scholarly evidence that that's really not the case. So I really don't know, and I guess scholarly world really doesn't know. So this puts Jewish life to a great test. Not in the history of the world has there ever been a people to be taken off their land, thrown to the four corners of the earth, and survived as a people.
Now, about when was this again?
This?
Yeah.
This started with the Romans. Jews were everywhere during the Roman Empire, but the dispersion started after the destruction of the temple in the year 70. And the only time this ever happened in the history of the world was when the Jews were taken off their land by the Babylonians and then allowed to come back. And Jews had to create a way of living in the diaspora, maintaining themselves as sort of a nation. But Jews didn't have much contact between each other from place to place. And you developed a whole different set of customs because Jews are great assimilators. Wherever they go, they take the best of the society and culture that they find themselves in, and they assimilate it to themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when you assimilate to such an extent that you lose your own identity, that's a problem. They still studied the same pages of Talmud in Spain and Northern Africa as they studied in southern France and in England. They read the same prayers with slight changes. Perhaps one of the greatest strengths of prayer and weakness of prayer at the same time occurred in about the 16th century, the advent of printing. All of a sudden you have a prayer book. Well, it's written down. You have to say it the way it's written. Before that, the cantor would be creative. He could say the prescribed prayers, but he would add extra prayers. And the whole Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur liturgy is filled with piyutim, these beautiful, beautiful added poems and prayers that were written by various scholars to the liturgy, and but that creativeness all of a sudden was lost when it was written down. During this time period, there were upheavals in the world. Constantine, if I remember correctly, became Roman Emperor. Was it 325 or something like that? Who knows history? Something like
320, 325, Council of Nice.
Okay, something. And they established that part of the world, the European theater, to be a Christian empire. There was the whole Roman Empire before, and that had grave implications for Jews because the Christians were very fearful of the Jews. And as I've said the past few times, they enacted many laws to separate Jews from Christians, not allowing Jews to earn a living in certain professions, not allowing them to own property in certain places, forcing them to wear special clothes to identify them separately, whether it be a yellow armband or a triangular hat. Nazis didn't invent these things.
Yeah, that's the same thing I thought I heard.
You couldn't. In certain places, you couldn't hire non-Jews to work for you, or especially domestically. Intermarriage was forbidden by the penalty of death.
Where in the wings of these books are those?
Where in the what?
Where in the wings of those books are those?
In what books? This book?
No, the old books.
In the Talmud?
Yeah.
Well, Talmud's already finished by the time this happened. I mean,
So where we started?
it discussed some of them. I would say that a lot of what happened was discussed in the commentaries, special cases. Especially you get cases like I'm going to go quickly through certain phases, just jump through it. Just want to give you the feel for it. The Crusades happened. Grand mission to rescue the Holy Land from the infidel Muslims who are taking control of it. And and it was a great. Actually, that was the thought behind it, but the real impetus was really financial, economic, and spirit of adventure. You had these feudal lords who really, after the Roman Empire fell, travel around the empire really diminished greatly. It became very dangerous. Everybody was isolated where they were, and these feudal lords developed in each area, and they had the serfs working for them. And Jews were allowed in certain communities and not in others, depending upon whether they helped the lords or not. And I'll get to that hopefully in a minute, or if not next week. And many of these lords became bored. They had nothing to do all day. So an adventure to the Holy Land, that's real exciting. Opened up new markets for them, new trails of commerce. They get spices and things and bring them in and sell. That sort of thing was a thought. And they got dispensations from the Pope for the murder and whatever the pillaging, whatever they were doing on the way. It would be all right if they take the Holy Land. The end justifies the means, which is really more of a Muslim concept than it is a Jewish concept, a Christian concept. And they went through town to town, and wherever they went, the Crusaders passed. If they passed a Jewish town, they would just destroy the Jewish community. They would rape the women. And they would take hostages, and they would try to sell them back to Jewish communities elsewhere for ransom. This became a very common thing, and many Jewish communities were decimated because of this. And there became many rulings among the rabbis. What do you do if a woman was taken hostage? I think I mentioned this. A woman's taking hostage. What do you do? And she's a married woman, and she comes back pregnant. She wasn't pregnant before, and she's allowed to live with her husband. Because if if a husband knows that a woman lives with someone else, and he's not allowed to live with her anymore, And the rabbis deal with this. It's a very difficult situation. They finally permitted, of course, they found a way to do it according to the law because it wasn't their fault, it wasn't their intention, that sort of thing. So that was happening in Europe, in the European theater. Up until the Crusades were, I don't know, 1100s, around there, at that time. There were great communities in Europe. Rashi was also around the 1100s. So you see that in certain areas of Europe, Jews did very well. They were insular. You could see by the nature of their writings, they tried to bring out the light that was from within. While in the writings of the Sephardic Jews in northern Africa and Spain, you could see from their writings that they were very much influenced, and they were mixing with all the other cultures, and they tried to combine the light that they found all around them, and see it through Torah. While this was happening in the Christian world in the European theater, what was happening here was Muhammad had just taken this whole area, just fell swoop, he just went right through it. You can read about Muhammad in the history book. It's very, very interesting reading, fascinating reading. Essentially, he was a camel driver, and he was very much involved with many Jews in his work, and he felt that the Jewish community was just going to just go along with whatever he had in mind, because he thought that what he was bringing them was the best of Judaism and the best of Christianity taken together, and what
Best of two worlds.
and the Jews didn't. Matter of fact, when it became too difficult to deal with, they chased him away, and they might have been partially responsible for his flight from Mecca to Medina, and that great grand trek that the Muslims take. Now it's their spiritual journey, and but it was easy for him in this newfound religion that he found to capture the minds of the pagan world, of the Arabs, that particular time, and he got thousands of converts, and he didn't care if he got converts by persuasion or by force, and that was perfectly fine to go by force, and he just swept through the whole Arabian Peninsula, then captured as well Palestine, and then for the Romans, and then went through northern Africa, and they fell asleep, and then into Spain, and for much of this time, Spain was ruled by the Muslims until perhaps the 14th and 15th centuries. The Moors are finally thrown out. But in the Muslim world, the Jews were called the people of the book, and they were treated with a certain respect and dignity, but granted a status of a secondary citizenship. They didn't have full citizenship, secondary citizenship, and then, by and large, they were left alone. I mean, it wasn't great living, but it was tolerable. And why? Why did the Jews live so well among the Muslims then, and today? It's so hard that the Muslims won't tolerate the Jewish presence in Israel, and they won't even tolerate a Christian presence in Lebanon. And the persecutions of the Christians in Lebanon today are just incredible. The world doesn't know about it, but it's unbelievable. Why? Because if you see the symbol of the Muslim world, the crescent, it's the Fertile Crescent. That whole area, this whole area belongs to them, and they don't want to tolerate a foreign presence in there that's going to be a ruling presence. But since the Jews were no threat at this particular time in the Dark Ages and the early Middle Ages, they were left alone, more or less, established their own communities. Besides, the customs of the Jews were very similar to the customs of the Muslims. And the Muslims could eat kosher meat. The Jews couldn't eat the Muslim meat, but they ate similar to that. They understood each other. Let's put it that way. And the Jews prospered, and they developed different customs because they were isolated. So you have Sephardic customs, you have Ashkenazi customs. Sephard means Spain, and Ashkenaz means Germany. So all the Jews that went north eventually to Germany called Ashkenazi Jews, and all the Jews went this way, Sephardic Jews. Eventually went to Spain called Sephardic Jews. I'll give you one typical example. Passover's coming up in about 8 weeks, 6 weeks, something like that. Sephardic Jews eat rice on Passover. Ashkenazi Jews would think it's the greatest heresy. It's rabbinic law. It's not it's not oral law. It's not Talmud. Why? If it's according to the Torah, and it's derived through the Talmud, on Passover you're not allowed to have any leavening, any chametz, which means from the 5 grains. What are the 5 grains? Wheat.
Rice.
No, rice is not a grain.
Barley,
Barley.
Wheat, barley, oat,
oats, rye.
rye, and spelt. Okay? So if it's not one of these 5, it's not considered chametz. Now rice and beans can be made into flour to act like a grain, so they're not permitted by the Ashkenazi Jews. But the Sephardic Jews never had that prohibition. It follows the whole thought. The Ashkenazi Jews of the north were trying to protect themselves from the world around them, so they added on more protections to the law. The Sephardic Jews were very comfortable mixing in the general world, and so they were open to things and didn't feel the need to surround themselves with such restrictions. Okay. Next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you through.
Is there a next week?
Well, the next time we meet, through the Middle Ages until the modern era. I think we covered more than 1,000 years tonight. I think that's pretty good. Today, rather. Yes.
You go into Kabbalah or talk about those books, the writings of how they played in with the Talmud or where it all came from?
Okay, ask me that next week and I'll deal with it, not to a great extent, because that's a course in itself.